"You're under arrest for faking a government employee," my husband said loudly enough for the entire restaurant to hear, even as my military badge hung visibly against my collarbone. He thought he'd won. He had no idea who I truly was. Before I tell you how this New Year celebration turned into the night my husband destroyed his own career, do me a small favor. Show some love to this channel by subscribing and dropping a comment about where you're watching from. It helps stories like mine reach people who need to hear them. The room went silent. Crystal glasses froze mid-air. Forks hovered above porcelain plates. The soft jazz playing through the speakers suddenly felt intrusive, like it didn't understand what had just happened. Daniel Ward, my husband of 6 years, chief constable of Brookhaven, stood beside our table with that familiar authoritative posture I'd seen him use in front of subordinates and reporters. His jaw was tight. His eyes were lit with something that wasn't duty. It was triumph. "Stand up, Elena," he ordered. Every face in the Ashford Hall turned toward me. Friends, colleagues, city officials, his parents, people who had toasted our marriage less than an hour earlier. My mother-in-law's wine glass trembled in her hand. Someone whispered my name. I didn't move. Daniel took another step forward, his voice rising. "You've been impersonating a government employee, carrying falsified credentials, misrepresenting yourself as military personnel." He gestured sharply toward my neck. The badge, a brushed steel identification plate, understated, unflashy, suspended from a black lanyard. No medals, no ribbons, just an insignia most civilians wouldn't recognize. But Daniel had, and he decided it was fake. "You don't get to sit there and play pretend anymore," he continued. "Not tonight." I slowly set my napkin on the table. 6 years. 6 years of marriage, of careful silence, of letting him believe what he needed to believe to feel bigger. This was what it had led to. "Daniel," I said calmly, "this isn't the place." He laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Oh, it's exactly the place. I'm done covering for you. I'm done with your vague answers and mysterious consulting work. I had you checked." That was the moment I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was premeditated. Captain Lewis Hart stepped into view from behind Daniel. His uniform crisp, his expression uncomfortable. 2 uniformed officers followed. "I warned you," Daniel said quietly, leaning closer. "I told you secrets don't stay buried forever." Around us, phones began to come out. Someone was already recording. "Daniel," his father said weakly, "maybe you should." "Not now," Daniel snapped without turning. "This is my responsibility." Responsibility. That word again. He reached for his cuffs. I stood. The chair scraped loudly against the marble floor, the sound echoing far more than it should have. I met his eyes, not with anger, not with fear, but with something steadier. Certainty. "You really want to do this?" I asked. He mistook it for a bluff. "I'm doing my job," he said. The first cuff, snapped, closed around my wrist. A gasp rippled through the room. As he reached for my other arm, my fingers brushed the inside of my clutch. A small pressure point. Hidden. Unremarkable. I pressed it. No sound. No light. Just a faint vibration against my palm. Daniel finished cuffing me and turned to the room like a man giving a speech. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption, but no one is above the law." He started guiding me toward the exit. That's when Captain Hart froze. His hand went to his earpiece. His posture changed. So did the air in the room. Outside, through the tall glass windows of the Ashford Hall, headlights appeared, then more. Not police cruisers. Black vehicles. Identical. Government issue. They moved with purpose. Daniel hadn't noticed yet, but Captain Hart had gone pale. "Chief," he whispered. "Sir, we have." The doors to the restaurant opened, and everything Daniel thought he knew about me began to collapse. The double doors of the Ashford Hall swung open with a controlled force that immediately silenced every whisper in the room. For people entered first. They weren't wearing police uniforms. They weren't wearing tactical gear either. Dark suits, clean lines, calm faces, the kind of people who never rush because the world usually moves out of their way. Behind them came two more, uniformed but not local. Their insignia wasn't Brookhaven blue. It was federal gray. Captain Lewis Hart went rigid. Daniel finally turned. "What the hell is this?" he snapped. "Who authorized?" The woman at the front of the group raised a hand. That single gesture stopped everything. "Daniel Ward," she said evenly. "Chief Constable of Brookhaven." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "Yes," Daniel replied, bristling. "And you are interrupting an active arrest." She produced her credentials, holding them up just long enough for him and everyone else to see. "Federal Strategic Operations Directorate, FSOD. This arrest is unlawful," she said. "Release her. Now." Daniel laughed once, sharp and incredulous. "You're telling me my wife is some kind of federal asset? That badge is fake. I've already confirmed." "You've confirmed nothing," the woman interrupted. She turned to me. "Elena Ward," she said, her tone shifting subtly. "General Sloan is en route. Are you secure?" "Yes, ma'am," I answered. That was when Daniel finally really looked at me. Not as his wife, not as the woman he'd been quietly belittling for years, but as something unfamiliar. Captain Hart took an involuntary step back. "General." Daniel repeated, "What does she mean, General?" The answer came from behind him. "Captain Hart." The voice was calm, commanding, familiar. Captain Hart spun around and snapped to attention so fast his chair tipped over behind him. "Yes, ma'am." Major General Rebecca Sloan stepped into the room, 2 silver stars on her shoulders. Every federal agent present straightened instantly. The restaurant erupted into stunned murmurs. Daniel stood frozen. General Sloan didn't look at him. She walked straight to me, stopped, and saluted. "General Ward," she said clearly, "apologies for the delay. Your signal reached Fort Redstone at 11:42 p.m. We mobilized immediately." The room went dead silent. Phones lowered. Mouths hung open. Daniel's face drained of color. "Gee, General," he stammered. That's not possible. She's my wife. She does consulting. She barely talks about work." I looked at him then, really looked, at the man who had married me without ever asking who I truly was. "Daniel," I said quietly. "You never wanted the answer." General Sloan turned to him at last. "Chief Constable Ward," she said, her voice cool. "You unlawfully detained a commissioned officer of the United States Federal Command Structure. You did so in a public venue, using local authority, based on a personal vendetta." Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "You are relieved of duty effective immediately," Sloan continued. "Captain Hart, you will surrender your badge and weapon to Agent Morris." Captain Hart obeyed without hesitation, hands shaking. "You will cooperate fully," Sloan added, "or this becomes much worse." She gestured to my cuffs. "Remove those." Agent Morris stepped forward and unlocked them carefully. The metal fell away from my wrists. I rubbed the faint red marks, feeling a strange calm settle over me. Daniel took a step toward me. "Elena." "I didn't know," he said desperately. "You have to believe me. You kept secrets. You disappeared for weeks. You let me think." "I let you think what you wanted," I replied, "because every time I tried to explain, you mocked it. You called it pretend work." Murmurs rippled again. Recognition flickered across faces. Someone whispered, "She's military." Daniel's mother, Margaret, finally found her voice. "Elena," she said shakily, "this is all a mistake. Daniel was just trying to protect." "Enough," General Sloan cut in. She turned to Daniel again. Your wife has served this country for 14 years, she said. Multiple classified operations. Strategic command roles. She outranks every law enforcement officer in this room. Daniel swayed, slightly. You embarrassed her, Sloan continued. And you embarrassed yourself. Agent stepped in. Daniel was gently, but firmly, guided away from me. This isn't over, he said hoarsely. I was doing my job. No, I said. You were doing your ego. As they led him toward the exit, he finally broke. Elena, please, he called. We can fix this. I didn't know who you really were. I didn't answer, because the truth was simple. He never asked. Outside, the night air was sharp and cold. Federal vehicles lined the street. Neighbors had gathered. News cameras were already arriving. General Sloan stood beside me. You handled that well, she said quietly. I'm tired, I admitted. She nodded. You've earned the right to be. Behind us, the Ashford Hall buzzed with shock and whispered fallout. Ahead of me, the life I'd been minimizing for years finally stood in the open, and there was no going back. The night didn't end when the handcuffs came off. That's the part people don't understand. They think humiliation has an off switch, that once the truth is revealed, everything resets. It doesn't. Outside the restaurant, the cold air hit my face like a slap. Red and blue lights reflected off the glass windows behind us, strobing across the shocked faces still pressed inside. Phones were out now. Someone was already live-streaming. I could hear my name being whispered, mispronounced, repeated with disbelief. Daniel stood near the curb, flanked by 2 federal agents who no longer touched him, but didn't leave his side either. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, he was still tall, still broad, but stripped of the invisible armor he'd worn his entire adult life. Authority. It had evaporated. I watched him stare at the ground like it might open and swallow him whole. For years, I had learned how to disappear in plain sight. Tonight, he was learning how exposed a man becomes when his power is taken away in public. General Sloan leaned slightly toward me. We'll move this quickly, she said under her breath. Internal Affairs, DOJ review. Suspension effective immediately. You don't need to engage. I nodded, though my chest felt tight. Daniel's mother pushed past a small knot of people, heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Her lipstick was smudged now, her composed image cracking. Elena, she said, grabbing my arm before anyone could stop her. You've made your point. This has gone far enough. I gently removed her hand. No, I said. This started long before tonight. She looked at me like I'd betrayed her personally, like I'd violated some unspoken agreement to stay small. You let us think you were nothing, she snapped. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I let you believe what you wanted, I replied. There's a difference. Daniel finally looked up then. His eyes met mine, and for the first time since I'd known him, there was no certainty there. No command. Just panic. You could have told me, he said hoarsely. At any point. You let me look like a fool. I almost laughed. Instead, I said quietly, you never listened. The agent stepped in, guiding him toward one of the unmarked vehicles. As the door closed behind him, something inside me settled. Not satisfaction, not revenge, finality. The next morning, the city woke up to headlines. Chief Constable suspended after illegal arrest. Federal investigation confirmed. Spouse revealed as high-level military officer. They didn't use my name at first. Just titles, ranks, blurred silhouettes. But the story spread fast. By noon, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Numbers I didn't recognize. Messages from people who hadn't spoken to me in years. Old colleagues, former neighbors, even Daniel's friends. I didn't answer any of them. I sat at the kitchen table in the apartment Daniel and I shared, staring at the thin crack in the wall above the sink. I'd meant to patch it years ago. Daniel said it was cosmetic, not urgent. Funny how that logic applies to more than walls. The door opened softly. Daniel stepped inside. No uniform. No badge. Just a man in jeans and a wrinkled coat. He stopped when he saw me. "I wasn't sure if you'd changed the locks," he said. "I didn't," I replied. "Yet." He swallowed. "They took my service weapon. My access card. I'm suspended pending investigation." I nodded once. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. That was the moment something broke, cleanly in me. "You never meant to respect me either," I said. He flinched. We stood there, married strangers in a room full of shared furniture and memories that suddenly felt rented. "I'd built my life around your career," he said. "I supported you." "No," I corrected gently. "You tolerated me as long as I stayed smaller than you." His jaw tightened. "You wore that badge tonight," he said bitterly. "You let everyone think." "I wore it because I am who I am," I said. "I didn't let you think anything. You decided." Silence stretched between us. Finally he asked, "Is this it?" I stood, walked past him, and picked up my coat. "It's been it for a long time," I said. I didn't pack that day. I didn't cry. I just left. The investigation moved fast. Too fast for Daniel. Internal Affairs uncovered years of questionable conduct. Unauthorized background checks, misuse of department resources, personal vendettas masked as investigations. My case cracked something open they'd been quietly ignoring. By the end of the month, he wasn't just suspended. He was charged. Abuse of authority, unlawful detention, obstruction. The man who once ran the city couldn't step foot in the building without permission. People asked me if I felt guilty. I didn't. I felt clear. I relocated temporarily to a secured residence near the base. Counseling was mandatory, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because living double lives fractures you in places you don't notice until the pressure lifts. During one session, the therapist asked, "When did you realize your marriage was over?" I didn't hesitate. "When he laughed at my work," I said, and I stayed quiet. That silence had cost me years. I wouldn't pay it again. Months later, the divorce papers arrived. Daniel didn't contest them. He didn't have the energy. The city moved on. It always does. New scandals, new heroes, new chiefs. But I didn't move back. I stayed where my name meant something only to those who needed to know it, where my rank wasn't a threat, and my silence was no longer mistaken for weakness. By the time the investigation officially closed, Daniel was no longer a public figure, just another cautionary tale whispered in training seminars about jurisdiction, ego, and power misused. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the woman I was before all this. The one who smiled through disrespect. The one who shrank to keep peace. She doesn't exist anymore, and I don't miss her. The day the charges became public, I was sitting alone in my new office, staring at a city that no longer knew my face. That anonymity felt earned. A quiet reward. Outside the window, traffic flowed the way it always does, people moving forward, unaware that an entire life had just been dismantled a few miles away. Daniel's name scrolled across news tickers now, stripped of the title he'd built his identity around. Former Chief Constable, under investigation, abuse of authority, unlawful detention. Words that follow you long after the headlines move on. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, what I felt was exhaustion. There's a specific kind of fatigue that comes from holding yourself together for years while everyone around you insists you're fine. When that pressure finally releases, it doesn't feel like relief at first. It feels like collapse. I took the rest of the week off. No uniform. No briefings. No encrypted calls. Just space. I walked. I slept. I let my body catch up to the truth my mind had known for a long time. The apartment Daniel and I once shared was officially mine now, but I didn't want it. Too many echoes. Too many moments where I'd swallowed words to keep the peace. I packed only what mattered. Everything else stayed behind, including the version of myself who thought love required silence. The divorce proceedings were mercifully brief. Daniel didn't fight. He barely spoke during mediation. He looked older, smaller, a man hollowed out by consequences he never believed would apply to him. At one point, the mediator asked if we wanted to say anything to each other. Daniel looked at me like he was searching for something familiar. "I loved you," he said quietly. I believed him. But love without respect is just possession with better marketing. "I know," I replied, "but that wasn't enough." He nodded, like he finally understood that this wasn't a negotiation. When it was over, I walked out of the building alone, sunlight warming my face, papers tucked under my arm. No tears, no drama, just forward motion. Back at work, my role shifted permanently. No more field ambiguity, no more half-truths. I sat in rooms where decisions were made quietly and consequences rippled outward across systems most people never think about. I was good at it, better than I'd ever been when I was hiding. General Sloan stopped by one afternoon, leaning against the doorframe with that familiar half-smile. "You're different," she observed. "I'm not pretending anymore," I said. She nodded. "That tends to help." There were still moments, though. Unexpected ones. A joke overheard in a hallway. A casual dismissal of someone's work. A tone that reminded me too much of a dinner table laughter I'd once endured. Each time I spoke. Not aggressively, not dramatically, but clearly. And every time the room adjusted. That's the thing about power. It doesn't need volume. It needs certainty. Daniel's sentencing happened quietly. No cameras. No speeches. A plea deal. Probation. A permanent end to the career he'd wrapped his ego around. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. My grandmother called me the evening it became official. "He's gone," she said simply. "I know. You okay?" I paused, checked in with myself honestly. "Yes," I said. "I really am." She smiled through the phone. I could hear it. Good. Then this whole mess wasn't for nothing. We talked about her garden, about the weather, about a book she was reading. Normal things. Healing things. Months passed. The city learned a new name. Daniel became a footnote, a warning, a story whispered to rookies about boundaries and hubris. And I became steady, not celebrated, not feared, just grounded. One evening, long after the noise had died down, I sat on my balcony watching the sun sink behind the skyline. My phone buzzed once. A message from an unknown number. I knew it was him before I opened it. "I finally understand what you meant when you said I never listened. I'm sorry." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I locked the phone and set it face down. Some apologies are acknowledgments, not bridges. I didn't need closure from him. I'd already built it myself. What he'd taken years to realize, I'd known all along. That shrinking yourself doesn't make anyone love you more. It just makes them comfortable hurting you. I stood, letting the evening air wrap around me, and felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Not because I'd won, but because I'd stopped losing myself to keep someone else standing tall. And that made all the difference. By the time the last court document was filed and the final signature dried, my life no longer felt like something I was surviving. It felt like something I was finally living. I didn't move far, just far enough. A different neighborhood, different rhythm, a place where no one knew my last name or what it used to be attached to. The apartment overlooked a river instead of a street, and in the mornings I watched the water move without hesitation, without apology. I learned a lot from that river. At work, I stopped being the woman who'd been arrested at a New Year's party and became simply what I always had been, competent, precise, trusted. The kind of presence people leaned on without realizing it until it was gone. Meetings ran smoother when I spoke. Decisions landed cleaner. And when I disagreed, people listened. Not because of rank alone, but because I no longer second-guessed my own authority. There's a quiet confidence that comes from having nothing left to prove. I didn't talk about Daniel. Not unless someone asked directly, which almost never happened. His name faded the way names always do when they stop being useful. But healing isn't linear. Some nights, I still woke up expecting to hear his keys in the door. Some mornings, I caught myself rehearsing explanations for choices I no longer needed to justify. Old habits take time to unlearn. Therapy helped. Not because I was broken, but because I'd been trained to normalize being diminished. My therapist once asked, "When did you first learn that keeping the peace mattered more than being safe?" That question sat with me for weeks. The answer came unexpectedly, in a memory I hadn't touched in years, standing beside my father as a teenager while he corrected someone who interrupted me mid-sentence. He'd said calmly, "Let her finish. What she has to say matters." I'd forgotten how that felt, to be defended without having to beg. That became my benchmark. If a space didn't let me finish, I didn't stay in it. If a person required me to disappear to be loved, I walked away. Slowly, carefully, my world rebuilt itself around that rule. I made friends who didn't flinch when I took up space. I dated, briefly, cautiously, but I never shrank again. The first time a man joked about my work being intense, I smiled and replied, "Then this probably isn't for you." And it wasn't.